Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our Bible study this morning. We're in the book of Numbers. We're going to be in Numbers chapter 20 here in just a minute. Numbers chapter 20. If you're looking at the lesson sheets, it's still lesson 2. It's a long, long lesson, the way he wrote that material. But it's lesson 2, but it's part 4. The Roman numeral 4, or IV, if you'd rather call it that, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, that's where we are in the lesson sheets, and I can give you a numerical number on the bottom of the page. It will be page 11. The number on the bottom of the page will be page 11. If you're looking at those question sheets that we've been using somewhat as a map, a guide through our study of the book of Numbers. But before we get back into this discussion, talk a little bit about what's going on here in Numbers chapter 20, let's go to God in prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the day that you've given us. Again, a beautiful day to come and to worship you, to learn more of your will, to appreciate your testimony, to learn from this history, to appreciate what you did to bring a nation of people that would ultimately lead us to the Savior, Jesus the Christ. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your love and your watch care that you wanted to provide a permanent answer for the challenge of sin. Thank you for loving us so much that you would use your only begotten Son to provide for that. Strengthen us in our endeavors to understand and appreciate your word every day, to make application of it and to live by it. Strengthen us in every righteous endeavor. And we pray all these things through thy Son's name. Amen. So, here in chapter 20, and we've been talking about various moments within the history. The book of Numbers does kind of an odd thing in some ways here. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a moment. But notice in the very first verse of chapter 20, then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, into the desert of Zin in the first month, and the people abode in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now, here's the tricky part. The first month of what? It doesn't say, does it? It doesn't say what first month we're talking about here. And we might just assume that maybe we're in the second year, right? Because we were talking about the first year just a few chapters ago of the wandering in the wilderness. But I think if you combine a couple of other verses of Scripture here, we're going to find out what first month we're dealing with here in this picture. So I'm going to fast forward you real quick. Numbers chapter 20. Close your eyes if you get motion sickness. Numbers chapter 20, as I scroll through that, look at verse 28. Verse 28 of Numbers chapter 20. So there's something else happening in this same moment in time. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garments and put them upon Eleazar his son, and Aaron died there in the top of the mount, and Moses and Eleazar came down from the mount. Just trying to get, so we've got Miriam's death, we've got Aaron's death, all in this same context. And let's go one more chapter. Jump to Numbers chapter 33. And here's why I say where it's kind of maybe in some ways a little different in the way that the book handles it. Numbers chapter 33, verse 38. So, Numbers 33, verse 38. And Aaron the priest went up into Mount Or at the commandment of the Lord and died there. In the 40th year, after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the first day of the 5th month. Okay, so we've got Miriam's death at the first of the month. Later, Numbers chapter 20 talks about the death of Aaron occurring. Numbers chapter 20 isn't chronological in some senses. It fast forwarded to the 40th year and talked about things that happened in the 40th year. Then the book of Numbers will come back later and kind of, you know how in movies and in TV you've got flashbacks, right? So you're way ahead here in the history, and then they'll go, oh, but let's look back here somewhere and see what happened so that we can figure this out. And so here comes the flashback, right, to where something occurred. That's the way the book of Numbers is going to work a little bit. So Numbers chapter 20, we're at the end. We're in the 40th year, first month, 40th year of the 40-year wandering in the wilderness. The events that occur, Miriam in the first month, she dies. Aaron in the 5th month, right? So we're talking about these first 4 or 5 months in this brief little piece of history that's given to us here in Numbers chapter 20. Then when we move forward, we'll get a little more of details and pictures and things that have occurred. By the way, if you're studying, you can actually add the first 5 chapters of the book of Judges. You can look at some of the things that are written in the book of Joshua. You can connect the dots a little bit to some of the various things that are going on as it relates to all of this history. But we've just kind of confined ourselves a little bit to what's been happening in the book of Numbers. Okay, so go ahead. I'm sorry.
Brian, I just have a note here in my Bible that says to refer back from this chapter 33, refer back to 2025.
Yeah. So that
And that tells him to take him to Mount Horeb.
right. And so it's some study Bibles help you make the connectivities between the chronological timeline, even though they happen 13 chapters apart in the book. Yep.
Does it say anywhere, I mean, we know why the children of Israel from 20 years old wasn't allowed to go into the promised land. We know why Moses wasn't permitted to go into the promised land. Is there anything saying why Aaron and Miriam?
Well, we're going to find out about Aaron here in just a minute in the text because of what happens at Meribah. I think he's going to get connected to what happens at Meribah with Moses. We'll find later that he gets connected to that, and that seems to be why God deals with him in the same fashion he dealt with Moses when they struck the rock rather than speak to it. But it's so I think that Miriam, I don't know, and again she had suffered some complications because of her complaints and her usurping at various times, at least on one occasion. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I've read or saw. There might be something that comes up that my brain's just not connecting to right now. I don't know much about her, but I think Aaron gets connected to Meribah, and because of that, that's why he is unable to go see the promised land as well. And I think we'll see that in this narrative. That's a good question, though.
She had been several years older than Moses, and she was the one that went and watched. I mean, they wouldn't send a 4-year-old to watch them.
They're not young, right? Because Moses is younger than Aaron. Yes, Aaron's the older brother, right? And and Moses, by the time he gets to the end of this process, he's how old? He's 120. Okay, so they're right. So the age could just simply be part of the issue with Miriam as well. As it relates to those things. Okay, so we've set that tone. Let me look at one other thing with you, and so just so we can kind of see where we're dealing with. That's where they are, in the wilderness of Zin. Okay, that's the location where you can find them as it relates to the things that are happening. In this scene initially. I was looking for an eraser. Boy, I tell you, sometimes I think I'm creative, and all I do is create problems for myself. Anyway, we'll look at that. I'll try to figure out. I'm using something new, and I thought I saw an eraser somewhere. Anyway, I'll worry about it later. So then came the children of Israel, as we stated, in that first month, and Miriam dies there, and they bury her there. And now we come to Meribah. So your question sheet said Moses and Aaron fail. How did God want Moses to provide water for the people in chapter 20, verses 2 through 8? So what did God tell him to do? Speak to the rock, right? The instructions here were speak to the rock. Is that different than prior moments with rocks and water? Yes, there was a prior moment where God brought water out of a rock, and he was told to strike that one, right? So striking a rock isn't foreign to the ideas of the way God has used Moses and the rod to bring forth water for the people, but that wasn't the instruction here. The instruction here is speak to the rock, because there was no water in that place. I want you to just jump down to verse 8. Again, we're not going to read every verse in these large contexts. We'll just try to get the pieces of history as best we can. So he said, take the rod. So he didn't say use it, but he does have it, right? He tells him to take the rod with him. And gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock, So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. Two quick things, by the way. The water's going to come from whom? God. And the other thing I want us to appreciate here is God isn't unsympathetic to the plight they're under, right? He understands that yes, they caused this. They were on the doorstep of the promised land. The spies go in, come back with that evil report. The people listen to that nonsense. And because of that, now they got to spend these 40 years. And we're at what point of that 40 years? 40 years in place, basically nomads in a place that isn't, it's not very hospitable, okay? And so God isn't unsympathetic to that. And so he hears the challenges of water and the issues relating to water. And so he tells Moses, all right, we can fix that, right? We can solve that problem. And gives Moses instruction by which he can provide water for the people. But the next question is, what sin did Moses commit then, and what was the punishment that you see that happens after the instructions here in verse 8? Okay, so we really look at that as two kinds of things, right? Two things in some senses that Moses does here that creates the problem. Number one, he doesn't follow what? He doesn't follow the instructions of God, right? He doesn't listen to the instructions that God provides to him. And it's interesting. Maybe we don't think, because we think, okay, he disobeyed because he struck it rather than speak to it. That's part of his sin process. He takes credit, right? We talk about pride. I think there's one other issue here, though, that we need to notice.
Verse 12 says he disbelieved.
Okay.
And didn't hallow God in their eyes.
Yeah. And the Lord spoke, notice that, verse 12. And the Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron, because ye believed me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. There's Aaron connected to Moses, by the way, at Meribah. In verse 12 as to why he will not go see the promised land either. But go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry. I don't want to cut your thought off.
Even though he disobeyed, God did. You think about that?
Yeah, and let's unpack that in a minute, because that's an interesting aspect of this as well, right? That none of this happened the way it should, and yet still God what? Still gave him water. All right? He still gave him water. Okay, so let's think about that for a minute, because I think that's part of this as well. Moses shows a lack of faith, according to verse 12. It's evidenced by his behavior, where he chooses to strike the rock rather than speak to it. Maybe he's relating back to how he got water the first time, right? But there's also this idea that when he speaks to the congregation, he's what? He's angry. He's angry with them.
So you can kind of see why he would be angry.
Yeah.
But you still can't disobey just because your frame of mind.
So Moses' sin here, and here's the point that I seem to, in this study of this, helped me appreciate this more. Moses' behavior here are bigger than we sometimes think. Sometimes we think, he got upset, he struck it rather than spoke to it, and he was a little bit filled with pride and saying, must we? And we kind of, but no, there's a much bigger picture here of his behaviors. I want to take you to an unusual text. Go to Psalm 106. I want you to notice something in Psalm 106. And let's look at verse 32. So notice the description in the Psalms. They angered him also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses for their sakes, because they provoked his spirit, so that he spake unadvisedly with his lips. what I want you to notice is that God's frustration with Moses is not just about him, but it's what he was saying, right? The things that Moses was speaking, he was supposed to speak to what? The rock. He didn't speak to the rock. He spoke to whom? The people. His failure in relationship to God's instructions isn't just, it's part of it, but it isn't just the fact that he circumvented God's instructions and struck it rather than speak to it. It goes beyond that according to the psalmist. The psalmist says part of Moses' problem was that when he spoke to the people rather than the rock in which he was supposed to talk to. Yes?
You know, the word says that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yeah.
And God knows our hearts, no matter what we are doing or anything else. He knows above all else what's in our heart. And then it just gives fruit when it speaks out of our mouths. If there's unbelief, or if there's doubt, or if there's fear, or anything else. And, you know, God's responding to that which was in Moses' heart that came out of his mouth.
Yeah. What was going on in the spirit of Moses came forth in the things that he was saying. And that's part of the reason why God's ultimately bringing consequence to Moses' behaviors in this text. But I thought that psalm text was interesting, that the psalmist would relate back to that scene and even tell us in the psalm that he spoke unadvisedly, right? In the manner in which Moses reacted in this scene. And so because of that, he's not going to get to go to the place that he spent all this time leading the people to. Now, I'm cautious here, but I want you to think about it with me for a second. On the surface, does that seem fair? Right. If we just kind of looked at it and went, you almost, right? It's almost like poor Moses, right? You know, he's been dealing with these people. He's been honoring God as best he can every step of the way. And at the end of the day, he still finds himself not even being permitted to go in to the promised land. But here's what I want you to remember. Yes, it might have been disappointing that Moses experienced an earthly discouragement or disappointment. But remember, and I'm going to illustrate it to you. Do we ever see Moses again? Yeah, Mount Transfiguration in Matthew chapter 17. I don't think I'm being speculative here. I think the imagery here is true. And behold, there appeared unto them, not the figure of, not a hologram of, not Elijah and Moses appeared to them. Moses is what? Alive and well with the Creator. In the fashion that he's able to bring Moses into the presence of these apostles that are gathered there with Jesus in that scene. Now maybe you might think I'm reaching too far with that, but I think when he says there appeared unto them, not, they were there. Moses and Elijah, they're there at the Mount of Transfiguration. And yes, Moses suffered a earthly consequence to his behaviors and choices as it relates specifically to what happened at Meribah. But it didn't have to cost him his eternal relationship with the Father. We're going to have some discouragements in life. There are going to be some things at times that don't appear to be fair, or they don't appear to be just, or maybe, I had a moment, right? And in that moment, I failed, and it brought to me potentially long-term earthly consequences. But it doesn't mean I have to abandon my eternal hope and promise just because I had an earthly failure. I'll save that for a sermon maybe someday. But that to me spoke, it's right, it speaks volumes here about Moses. And yeah, it's sad. It's just miserably sad to think how much he went through, and then to throw all those earthly benefits away because he just can't handle his spirit and his thinking and his speech here at this moment at Meribah, but it didn't change who he was and how important he was in the cause and purposes of God, so much so that he's present when Jesus becomes elevated in the eyes of the disciples. You know about Moses, you know about the prophets like Elijah, but this is my son. But Moses is there in the presence of that.
Might have asked for forgiveness.
Yeah, we don't.
We don't know that.
And I think, see,
Mercy of God.
yeah, and he eventually permits him, right, to step in, or not step into, but to go up on Pisgah and take a look before he dies. Go ahead, Bob.
Is there two Meribahs? In Exodus 17, it talks about place Massa and Meribah, because of the Israelites quarreled and became a test of the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? And then here at the latter part of their journey is Meribah again. I just wonder if it's two different places, or did they revisit the same place?
I don't know. It's fair best answer right now. I'm having to think about that. My heart says it's the same place. My mind says it's the same place that just gets visited. But I'm trying to think whether they would have been. But this is by Kadesh Barnea. This is where they are now. And so, even though, and it's hard, right? Because we kind of know, but we don't know. When they build these maps, there's some archaeological finds that they can narrow down. We know where Jerusalem is, right? And we can know where Jericho. We know where certain places are, but we don't always have precision, particularly in the wilderness, right? Of where certain locations may have been. And I'll have to look at that, Bob. I'm trying to recall in my own mind, but I don't know the answer to that.
Same area. They're not wandering halfway around the world.
Right,
They're
right.
wandering right there.
Right. And again, I just don't want to give a definitive answer that I don't know. Yes.
Could it be a link between?
This changed Moses' attitude towards the people.
Yeah.
To-
Well, I mean, he's struggling, but he's been struggling, right? Addressing.
Because he went to God a few times for him.
Yeah. And he's protected them from destruction a couple of times.
You were speaking in First Chronicles in your lesson that I watched on YouTube, and you were talking about the different things that we were being taught about. The leadership was being taught, David, and then to Solomon, to know God, to serve God, take heed, and also in that I saw in Moses that moment where he did not listen to God, he didn't obey him, he didn't heed him. He had to have known God to the point where having anger in his heart or unbelief was not pleasing to God. And for Moses to have been allowed into the promised land, he would still be in a leadership position, and that would have possibly infected the people below him into doing the things that they would do. That's how I saw that,
Sure.
that God was preventing that from going through the rest of the tribe of Israel when they went into the promised land.
He definitely, in this moment, he does seem to kind of miss the point with the kinds of things that David shared with Solomon when Solomon was about to take over. And I think there is some of that here and I don't want to speak on behalf of God, and I think we can see it in some of the things in the history that does get revealed to us, but they were turning the page. And so there would be new leaders and a new generation that would go and conquest the land. And it does, you can at least understand it from just a making sense kind of thing, that with this new purpose that's coming, new leadership is sensible. as they do that. Any other thoughts? All right, so let's go back to Numbers chapter 20. And so in verse 14, we got a problem, right? And here, and I'll be honest with you, I've struggled. I've looked at maps, and I've tried to figure all this out, and I still don't have a clarity. I went back to some of the things that Bob and Sandra Waldron had done in their book on history and geography to try to piece what they thought about it and some of that. But we've got an issue, right? And the issue is they're trying to get east and north, and the easiest way to do that is go through where? Right. So the easiest way to do that from the wilderness of Zin there is to go across from Kadesh Barnea area and go straight across into Edom in order to be able to do that. The problem is Edom doesn't what? They don't want them to do it. Okay? They don't want them to do it. The question was, what did the messengers of Moses request from the king of the Edomites in verses 14 through 21? Yeah, they just want basic passage, and we won't what? We're not going to cause any harm. Well, by the way, stop for a minute, right? Because we know these to be the people of God. We know that these Israelites are the chosen of Jehovah God, the only true God. But the Edomites, all they see is what? 2 million people that are about to traipse through my garden. You know, my mom didn't even want one person walking through the garden, let alone 2 million people walking through the garden, right? And so you get it. You get it a little bit here, that they're uneasy about this situation.
I'm sorry, is there a conflict in their history?
Well,
Was your brother?
so where did the Edomites come from? They came from Esau. If you think about that, you can go to Genesis chapter 33. Where do the Israelites come from? That's Jacob, right? And in Genesis 33, he encounters God there at the mud of the Jabbok River, and he wrestles with God. And in that moment, that's where he touches the sinew of his hip to be that constant reminder that he wrestled with God in that place. And I will change your name to Israel. And he feared that Esau was what? Coming to kill him, right? But Esau, when he gets there, has let all that go and treats him like a brother. And the hope here is that the descendants of Esau, the brethren of these Israelites, will cooperate with them and let them cross over and into the area in which they're trying to get. They're not planning to stay. They just need passage through that area. Notice verse 18. And Edom said unto him, Thou shalt not pass by me, lest I come out against thee with the sword. You're not coming, and if you do, I'm coming as if it's an act of war. You may not think it's an act of war. You may think I'm just trying to travel through here, but if you come in, I'm going to treat it like an act of war. So the children of Israel said unto him, We will go by the highway, and if I and my cattle drink of thy water, then I will pay for it. I will only, without doing anything else, go through on my feet. So they're like, listen, we're not going to be traipsing through people's land. We're not going to be destroying pasture fields. We know resources are limited. We'll use the highway. We'll use the road, the path through Edom that will allow the least amount of challenge or difficulty to come. But that doesn't satisfy them either, right? They're basically saying in verse 20, it's not happening. We're not going to permit it. Thou shalt not go through. And Edom came out against him with much people and with a strong hand. Come out with show force, right? So rather than cause trouble, what did they do? So they're going to have to find a different path. Whether time will permit me to talk about that this morning, we'll find out in a minute. But at this point, they turn away, right? Requested passage, not happening. Come on, we'll just travel by the highway. Nope. Here comes a show of force. If you think we're kidding, we're not, right? We're coming. And so they go a different direction. And then we jump to what? Okay, so now we jump to the death of Aaron. Okay, so we tried to find safe passage, didn't work out, but now we're going to talk a little bit and pause in that narrative and talk about the death of Aaron. But before we get there, there was an interesting question, I thought, that the writer of the material asked. It was question 2 under that Edom refuses passage. And the question was, when and how did God punish the Edomites? Does Numbers chapter 20 even talk about that? No. So you weren't going to get an answer to that question out of Numbers chapter 20. You're going to have to do a little more research than that to kind of get a picture of that. So when and how did God punish the Edomites?
One more chapter forward, it talks about, that the king of they were already conquered by this time, by Sihon, if I'm saying it right.
Point me to it.
Chapter 21, 28.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was where you were. So for there is a fire going out of Heshbon, a flame from the city of Sihon. It hath consumed Ar of Moab, and the lords of the high places of Arnon. So Edom and Moab are two different. Those are two different places. Moab is to the north. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm not trying. I just don't want to answer for you. I'm trying to let you get there. 23. Well, there's Sihon again. Okay. Here's my point I'm trying to drive at. You're way into the future. Right? You go way into the future with the Edomites. So you can go to any of those prophets. You can go to Jeremiah and he'll talk about him. You can go to Ezekiel and he'll talk about him. You can go into those prophets and you'll see it in various moments. Go to chapter 24, book of Numbers. Chapter 24, verse 18. Here's the declaration. He said, and Edom shall be a possession. Seir also shall be a possession for his enemies, and Israel shall do valiantly. So, Edom's still okay for a while here. And initially God, right, Edom wasn't part of where the Israelites heading. I'm not trying to insult you here. They're heading up, right, they were trying to get north, and then because of the wandering of the wilderness, they kind of take an interesting path, but you know, here's the land they're trying to conquer. Edom and Moab are on the other side. Okay? That wasn't going to be part of the promised land. Edom and Moab would have been left alone. But because they refused to help God's people, now God says, okay, I'm going to give you that too. In chapter 24, verse 18. I'm going to give you Edom too. It'll eventually be a possession for you. The entire book of Obadiah is about prophecies concerning Edom. It's one chapter. He's a minor prophet. One chapter prophet. The whole book of Obadiah is about God's judgments against Edom. Let me share one other text with you before the children come upstairs. 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 13. And David gat him a name when he returned from smiting of the Syrians in the valley of Salt, being 18,000 men, and he put garrisons What was the prophecy, Numbers chapter 24, verse 18? I will give Edom as a possession. Not necessarily something you would just wipe off the map. They will become a possession. When David, here leading the people, he put garrisons in Edom, throughout all Edom put he garrisons, and all they of Edom became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. Now, I readily admit, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of Bible preachers and teachers that have far greater understanding of this history than I do. It has always been, call it a weakness, call it whatever you want to call it, but it's something I have to work at, trying to get all this history in my head. But it seems as though what's being said in Numbers chapter 20 and chapter 24 wasn't something that was going to happen today. It was something that ultimately, as a possession, comes many, many, many years later, when David finally establishes garrisons in that land and takes possession of it. Everything that God makes prophecy about doesn't happen immediately. Every promise of destruction or behaviors being judged or things that are going to, they don't always happen immediately. And unless I'm missing something or mistaken here, it appears that it's clear into the time of David when the people actually take possession and control, if you will, over Edom. And again, like I said, I knew I wasn't going to get to that map again, because we got some issues to try to figure out, because, and I'll give you this, and you can look at it for Wednesday. Edom appears to not allow them to go through. They appear to turn their attention away from that. You can go into the book of Judges, I think you see some of the history, that they also asked Moab. And that didn't go well. But here's the hard part, and you guys look at it, I'll look at it some more to try to figure it out. It doesn't appear that they get passage through Edom, and yet some of the cities that they're about to name that they go through are smack dab in the middle of Edom. So look at that. See what you guys come up with as to how that's possible, that in one breath it looks like they didn't go through Edom, and yet there are going to be cities that are named in their next travels that are right there in Edom. And maybe, I think with a little bit of effort, we can kind of make sense out of some of that when I can show you a map, Lord willing, on Wednesday.